The action takes place in a dark castle. The unknown said it wasn't so bad for a pitifully mortal. The paladin asked the unknown man if he was still brave. He said that it looked like he had not had enough. At this point, the demon began to shout, and Podin asked him why he was shouting. But from the moment the demon said it took him anyway. Because the paladin is trapped. She told the guy not to forget it. The paladin said he remembered. He asked and what the demon was going to do next. The paladin realized that even though he had been captured, only his leg had been taken. It would have been easy for him to defeat the demon. Before that, he said the demon king was finished. He was going to attack. But his sword broke. The paladin was disappointed that his sacred sword had just taken and broken. He realized that he needed to calm down and think again. He realized that of course it was sad that he wouldn't be able to take the demon king's head off now. But the crown prince should have awakened from his curse by now, which meant his main mission was complete. The paladin realized that the high priestess would definitely scold him for breaking the ball. But his power was weakened in exchange for breaking the curse, and it was not his fault. At that moment, the paladin turned to the demon king and called him a bloke. The demon king was outraged and said that he actually had a name, but the paladin said his name was too long to remember. The paladin told the demon to stop pulling and either run away or die. He said not to keep him here. The demon king said he managed to take away his powers. He said he admits his defeat, but the paladin can't just walk away. The paladin was surprised and asked what the big talk was about. He said the guy was a weirdo. The demon king told the kid not to interrupt him. He said the guy was a paladin and should have a conscience. But the paladin said he was going to kill him here and asked why he had a conscience. He said the demon should just say what he wanted. The demon said the boy would be sorry. The paladin thought that if the sword hadn't broken, this case would have ended immediately. He realized that he had certainly been underestimated before. But at that moment, the demon said that even if he couldn't defeat the guy's body, he could destroy his soul. He said it would take him 1,000 years to regain his strength after this spell, but he told the paladin not to forget that as the Lord of Darkness, he has a lot of responsibilities. The paladin said that slavery was abolished years ago, and asked if the rituals were still performed. He asked what century they lived in. The demon said that among these victims is the soul of one weak girl that got to him thanks to the contract. He said he was now going to transmute her soul into a paladin's body. At that moment, the paladin threw something at the demon king and said to repeat. The demon said fearfully that it was very silly. The paladin interjected. He said it was a demon trying to mess with human souls. He asked and that he would be the one to tell him something else about stupidity. But the demon said he'd do it right away anyway. He said that even as a paladin, he wouldn't be able to use half the male power in a girl's body. But at that moment, the paladin objected that she was the girl. After a while, the protagonist opened her eyes. She looked at her hands and realized they were very thin. She had tiny, pale hands, and her skin was very soft. At that moment, the maid saw the main character and was very surprised. She said it couldn't be. She said the girl finally woke up. The protagonist didn't understand why she was being called that. She had never been called that before. After the protagonist stood up and realized that her body was very small. She was not even used to looking down from such a height. The protagonist realized that means the demon had managed to swap their souls. She realized that this girl's soul was now in her body. The protagonist was worried about the girl because she realized that things were bad, but she realized that she had to go to the church and ask them to send a squad to save her. But she decided that first, she needed to let everyone know that she was alive. She realized she had to go to the church immediately. The protagonist asked the maid how long she had been unconscious. The maid said that a week ago. She said that a week ago, the girl suddenly collapsed and never regained consciousness. The protagonist was surprised that it took so long and asked if anything unusual had happened in the meantime. The maid said that the girl had just woken up, so she didn't think she should know right now. She said that Paladin Roel is no longer of this world. The protagonist was surprised that everything happened so quickly. She realized it wasn't enough for the Demon King to switch bodies. He also killed her physically. But the protagonist thought it was fortunate that this girl's soul had been saved. If not, she'd just fallen into the clutches of the Demon King. But since she had switched bodies with Roel, the contract was broken. The protagonist thought that let the girl's soul find peace in the arms of the goddess. But she didn't understand why such a young and well-off girl would sell her soul to a demon. The maid told Roel she understood her shock. The main character was surprised because she remembered that she didn't know this girl, and she thought it was clear that she was horrified by the news of her own death. But now she is in the body of an ordinary orphan, so they have nothing in common. The maid cried and said that Roel was so fond of Roel. The protagonist realized that the girl was one of his fans. Thought it was no surprise, as she was liked by a lot of girls. The main character thought she was attractive and had a nice personality. She is also strong, and at the age of 20 became captain of the Paladins, after which she was nicknamed Gifted. Roel thought that even though she was a girl, because of being a minister of the church, one could not marry, and that was how she was perceived by everyone as a dream man. She told the maid that her heart was broken. Roel asked the maid if she could elaborate. The maid said that half a month ago, because of the curse placed on the prince by the Demon King, a group of paladins went on a campaign to crush him. The protagonist remembered that everything was right because she was accompanied by her comrades on the way to the Demon King's castle. But since the others didn't have so many sacred powers, only she was able to pass through the castle's magical barrier. But it ended up working out pretty badly. The maid said it was fortunate that the prince had broken the curse. Roel realized that since this spell had drained the Demon King's powers, and the barrier was bound to collapse in its wake. At that moment, the maid told the protagonist that she seemed different. Roel realized that it wasn't her mistress. It was the soul in her body that was different. But she didn't understand how to tell her that the soul of the dead paladin was now living in the body of their mistress. The main character thought she might have to play dumb. She said she seemed to have lost all her memories. The maid was surprised and interrogated. The main character asked for her name. The maid said her name was Sila. She is the count's eldest daughter, 19 years old. The maid asked if the girl didn't remember anything at all. Roel repeated that she was asking about it because she didn't remember anything. She asked why she would lie, but there were actually reasons. At that moment, the maid asked the girl if, on the pretext of losing her memory, she wanted to try to leave her house. Roel was surprised and asked again. The maid said that the girl could go to a convent, and there her mother and fiancé would not bother her. The protagonist realized that it seems that this girl's life had not been spoilt either. She asked what was wrong with her mother. The maid tells her that she is her stepmother, and because her son is still young, the protagonist is like an eyesore to her. The protagonist asked what about the father, but the maid said he hasn't liked her much since he was born. Roel realized that the one who made the deal with the demon was apparently her father. Roel realized that she couldn't go to church just yet, but she realized that it would be better to pretend to be a Sila to find out more about the contract. After a while, the maid told the protagonist something and said that therefore nothing would be left for the young gentleman to inherit. Roel asked, so her brother isn't the heir apparent. That's right. The maid confirmed this and said that now a direct descendant of the house of Aario, she. The protagonist learns that in fact, Count Aario, her father, was a decoy. Therefore, his children from his second marriage have no direct connection to the family, and the Count's heir is his eldest daughter. That is, the brother and sister have no inheritance rights, but the protagonist realized her stepmother wouldn't just let it go. The maid tried to say something to the main character and said that it was the woman, but at that moment she stopped and covered her mouth with her hand. She said that the new mistress is using the main character to push her son as heir. The maid said that the trouble is that the earl doesn't interfere. The maid said what else, the new mistress's family is very powerful. The maid said that a girl from a noble family became a countess. The maid said she thought she wanted to raise the Aario family under her, and had already begun to act. She said that Roel's engagement to this strange man was also because of that. The protagonist realized the woman was acting fast. She thought she was similar. She wanted to get rid of her by any means necessary. The protagonist realized that marrying her off was the most harmless way. And if it didn't work, she thought the methods would be more severe. The protagonist asked if she could attend Mr. Roel's funeral, but the maid said it wouldn't work because they say only the upper class will be there, but she said there was one way. The maid said that the funeral service will be held first in the temple and then in the palace, so it is possible to look from one place to another during the process. The main character thought it was too much. She said then she would go at least to see it. The maid asked that it seems that even after losing his memory, he is very dear to the protagonist. She said that if Roel wanted to go, she should ask the new mistress for permission, and she said that whenever the protagonist goes out, she sends the Viscount Schwat with her. The maid said she thought this time was no exception. The main character said it's fine because I still wonder what kind of person he is. But the maid said the girl would definitely be disappointed, Afterwards, she left and told the girl to rest. Afterwards, the protagonist lay on her bed. She wanted to tell the church she was alive, but she realized that if she said she was a Paladin commander, it would be a miracle if she wasn't branded crazy. Besides, everyday life there seemed like a horror to her. She didn't want to get there again. And most importantly, Paladins are not allowed to marry. The protagonist was very lonely but wanted a family. Serving God is honorable and respected. Yet he who gives his life to service will be eternally lonely. So now Roelle wanted to live a normal life. She thought that giving her life to break the curse on the prince was more than enough. She thought she could live a normal woman's life now. Divine power gift of the goddess is not attached to the body, but to the soul. So even changing the body of the protagonist can use the power of a paladin. She thought that even though her body was fragile, she would be able to stand up for herself. But Roelle realized that she could only dream of a similarly peaceful life. The maid told the protagonist that her sister had told her to move most of her clothes to the dressing room, so there wasn't much left. The maid said that only the old outfits were left. She said that the main character's sister had also taken all 3 of the ceremonial outfits that were made this year. Roelle asked her sister she's 17 like that. The maid confirmed it. She said she was 2 years younger. She said her sister was very jealous of Ingrid, so much so that she even took the clothes away, out of spite, because she wouldn't wear them herself. The maid showed me the dress and said it was the freshest thing left, but it had been sewn last year. The maid told the protagonist not to think her family was frugal. She said that the protagonist is the only one who only gets a new dress once a season. Roelle thought she'd never worn them before. At that moment, the maid told Roelle to try on the dress. After the protagonist tried on the dress and thought the girl was very beautiful, but she realized that she didn't have a drop of magical powers in her. The maid wanted to put makeup on the main character, but she said she didn't need it. The maid tried to object to something, but the main character said she was going to the funeral anyway, and was afraid that her tears would wash away all her labors. But really, she just couldn't stand the smell of makeup. Many girls presented the protagonist with their letters, and always jumped a little with their perfume, and she almost gasped. Being a paladin, there was no way she could reject them, but her head was just exploding. Roelle said what she meant. Now all she had to do was track down her mother and convince her to let her go. Then they went outside, and the maid told the girl that Madame was usually in the central garden at this hour. She said she'd already warned her about the protagonist's desire to attend the funeral, so she'd probably give her consent. But she said there would definitely be one pesky fly following them. The main character asked the maid if she was talking about her fiancé, and the maid confirmed it. At this point, Roelle said their estate was huge. The maid said that the House of Inferno is not close to the ruling dynasty. These lands belong to their family, so Inferno is extremely wealthy. The protagonist asked when the manor was built. The maid said that it was when the Earl married the new mistress. The protagonist remembered that it is said to hide wealth in a conspicuous place. After that, they arrived at Mrs. Approaching her stepmother, the protagonist gave her a hand. The stepmother surprised her and asked her what it meant. It's all because of an old habit of the main characters. She took her hand away and said it was nothing. Roelle looked at her stepmother and couldn't say anything. She didn't know what daughters usually talk to their maternity mothers about. After all, she had never had a mum and had no idea at all. She thought she should say hello first. At this point, the stepmother asked the protagonist means she wanted to go out. Roelle said she did. She said she wanted to attend Sir Roel's funeral. The stepmother agreed and said she had already contacted Viscount Schwalt. She said he must be here by now so Roelle could go with him. Roelle agreed, and her stepmother said she was surprisingly humble. The main character said she was just extremely saddened by the death of someone she really liked. The stepmother told the girl to be careful not to shame the family. After they left, and she was told by the protagonist that she was disappointed that her stepmother was as beautiful as she imagined her to be. But the maid told the protagonist that she's only beautiful on the outside and a monster on the inside. She said there's a rumor that she's the one who faked Mum Ingrid's death. The protagonist asked if she killed her. The maid said she was willing to bet. An unexpected death, such a quick second marriage, and the house was rebuilt immediately, plus rumors of murder. The protagonist realized it all matched up too well, and she doubted it was just a rumor. Afterwards, they went out to the carriage. The protagonist assumed this crew was waiting for her. After the protagonist saw the guy and was very scared. She didn't understand what he was doing here. There is always an everywhere rivalry. As a dog is a natural enemy to a cat, So Imperial Knights are the enemy of the Paladin M, and the worst of them all is the Third Knight Squad, the Crown Prince's personal guard. Paladins serve the goddess, Imperial Knights to the palace. The protagonist realized that they had had a bad relationship for quite some time, but recently it had been getting worse and worse. Since the Empress, the Crown Prince's mother, was a saint, and she often went to church with him. And since he was very close to the Paladins, it was the Paladins who took up the task of getting rid of his curse. Of course, the Knights were unhappy with this arrangement. This guy is the worst of the Knights of Gainscar. He was one of the protagonist's subordinates, and then betrayed her by leaving the ranks of the Paladins. The protagonist realized that now she was no longer burdened with the rank of commander, so she could easily kill him. She realized that now was her chance to deal with what she thought was a living misunderstanding, but she didn't know if she could defeat him in this body. But at that moment the maid turned to the girl and told her not to dare. She said the guy was the worst and the worst possible option. The main character agreed and said she was his fiancée. She asked if he'd eat her. Roel assumed that the maid thought she was attracted to him. The maid said who knows because the man is in cahoots with Madame. At that moment, the man turned to the protagonist and said that they had not seen her for a long time. He said the carriage was waiting. Afterwards, they set off on their journey. The groom Roel introduced Gain and said that he was a member of the Third King's troop and a good friend of his. Roel said it was wonderful. She didn't want to meet his eyes or she'd start searing him. At this point, the groom told the protagonist that she was as silent as ever. The main character didn't say anything, but she thought that the guy wouldn't piss her off because she didn't talk to him. But she realized she should have been nicer to him. But she couldn't see that she had a feeling that it would be better to keep quiet and not move. The guy told the protagonist that he heard she had been sick for a while. He said that he, as her future husband, should have visited her. He said he was very sorry about that. Roel was surprised he didn't even visit his comatose fiancée, but she said there was nothing wrong with that. She thought there could be no mistake and the guy was the worst. At that moment, Roel looked out of the window and asked the Viscount if they had traveled the wrong way. The guy replied that the main road and the surrounding areas were blocked because of the funeral. He said it was, and they would have to take a diversion. But the protagonist realized it wasn't just that. But she didn't even mention to him where she wanted to go. She realized the guy was a very shady guy. But Roel decided to just go with the flow because she wondered what they were up to. After they arrived and the Viscount asked permission to help the girl out of the carriage, Roel looked at the hand and realized that she hadn't thought before how much an outstretched hand could hurt her pride, like she was some kind of weakling. But she remembered that girls liked it when she did that. But the protagonist couldn't remember exactly if they liked it. She skipped past the guy and said she could handle it on her own. Afterwards, they went to an old bar outside of town. Roel wondered what horrors might be going on here. She thought it would be great if it had something to do with the demon contract. She asked Viscount if he had to meet someone here. The guy said yes and asked if she'd go with him. After the Viscount started to climb the stairs and asked Gain to wait here. After that, he asked the protagonist to follow him to the first floor. Roel asked if she should go there. The Viscount asked why not. He said there was nothing to do without a girl. The protagonist thought it was really about the contract. She realized that it was all very suspicious. Afterwards, they came into the room. The protagonist realized that no one was here yet. She thought she wouldn't want to be late for the funeral. But at that moment, the Viscount closed the door and told Roel that she should not pretend to be an unintelligent girl. He asked if she thought she could get out of here alive. The protagonist was surprised and asked again. She didn't understand why the guy started talking so strangely. At this point, she wondered if he was going to attack her. The Viscount spread his hands and asked if it was taking so long to get to her. He said that she was always acting like a wild cat to him, but today she would be a good and obedient girl. He asked if she'd already resigned herself to it. He said she was trapped, so she should. But the protagonist interrupted him and advised the guy to cover his mouth, and then stabbed the guy in the stomach. Then she said if he made a sound, she'd kill him. She said she could crush his head and the Geen wouldn't have time to save him. So she advised the Viscount not to make a move. The main character said that no one would ever believe that such a petite girl could fracture someone's skull, so the blame for the murder would be pinned on Gain. So she said to think 100 times before you do it. Vicomte, how dare she? Roel said she didn't think she should have broken his limbs before negotiating. Afterwards, she broke the guy's arms. She said to just answer her questions. She asked what links him to the Countess of Aario. but the Viscount said that when he dealt with the protagonist, she promised to give her a share of her possessions. The protagonist didn't understand what it meant to not make a deal, but she said she didn't hear remorse. That's when the guy started apologizing. He said that the heroine had never obeyed him, but the Countess demanded that her innocence be taken away at any cost. The protagonist realized that the Vicomte was just one of her pawns. At this point, Roelle started to leave and said that she hoped the guy wouldn't tell anyone about what had happened today. She also advised him to break off the engagement. She said it would be better for the guy to comply and he would be healthier. Afterwards, she jumped onto a tree branch. Her feet hurt like hell because she forgot she was wearing heels. The girl realized that if it wasn't for her holy power, they would have broken by now. Roelle realized she'd be in trouble if the Gain saw her, and it was best to get out of here as soon as possible. Afterwards, the protagonist went to her funeral. Many people were sorry that Roelle had died and cried. The protagonist had a strange feeling from contemplating them all killing for her, and her mates carrying the coffin. It's respect, more of it than possible. Was grateful to all of them. But she didn't understand why they were crying like this. She thought these fools were everything to her. The whole thing pissed Ingrid off. She thought she shouldn't have come to her own funeral. In the evening, the protagonist returned home. The maid ran to meet the protagonist and asked what happened to her because she was very pale. Roelle said it was nothing and she was just tired. The maid said she should rest soon then. She said she had already prepared a bath for her. Afterwards, Roelle lay in the bathtub and pondered everything that had happened. She realized that it wasn't her fault, but she felt like she was the evil one. She thought she had just abandoned her comrades and was enjoying a new life of so-called luxury. She thought she should come back. She wanted to be a Paladin in the service of the goddess. Her soul is still the same, only her body has changed. But Roelle realized that the idea would have to meet the priestess first, but she wasn't sure she could do that. The day of the incident, a day marked by the date of the goddess's arrival in the mortal world, and those who have laid down their lives in her service gather in the main hall to be blessed by the priests. Of course, only those priests who are frankly equal to paladins can enter the hall, although, even being part of the church, it is very difficult to meet the high priestess. But the main heroine believed that if she saw with her, the priestess would definitely be able to recognize her soul since she has connections with the goddess. The protagonist realized that first she needed to get into the ranks of the churchmen, but she knew that it was not difficult because the church will accept anyone who has sacred powers. The incident was 3 months away and realized she needed to get to church by then. She also wanted the Count. The protagonist decided to avenge Sila Inferno, donate her money to the church, and confirm her true identity. The main character told the maid she'd like to see her father. I said that the Count usually visits a girl unless he has some important business to attend to. The maid said that it proved once more that he didn't care for her at all. Roelle said she wanted to talk to her stepmother then. After all, her engagement is off. The maid was surprised and asked if the girl had really broken off the engagement. The main character was sure that the girl's head was full of it. She said the Viscount said they didn't want to see her again. She said there was nothing to be done. She said that even if she wasn't her mother, she should at least let her know. The maid said it's really great and she can't wait to see her reaction. After a while, the protagonist came to her stepmother and said that she wanted to tell her something very important. The stepmother pointed the girl to a chair and ordered her to sit down. She said she knew the Viscount was no good to her, but she said she shouldn't have killed him even like that. The protagonist was surprised and asked if he was really dead. The stepmother confirmed that the Viscount was murdered, but Roelle realized she hadn't beaten him that badly. She realized that she had broken his legs and arms, but there was no blood, and she had not injured him more seriously. Besides, his friend was in the neighborhood. Roelle said the Viscount was perfectly well when she left him. She realized he was wounded, but it was nothing fatal. She has decades of combat experience and knows her way around a wound. The protagonist asked why she was blamed for his murder. The stepmother said it was because she was the one who killed him. Roelle said she'd had enough of empty accusations. She asked how she could kill a healthy man. She said he had an imperial knight with him. She asked how she could handle the two of them. But the stepmother said there was a witness to her crime. The protagonist realized there could only be one witness, who betrayed her and left the Paladins. The protagonist thought Gain was a scoundrel. The stepmother realized that the protagonist knew the man, but she said it's not surprising because the killer must know him. Roelle asked if there was any proof, but she thought there could be no proof for Sila and the Inferio would not have had the strength to kill the Viscount. Indrid told the woman that she realized something and just wanted to get rid of her, but to accuse her of murder was too much. She said her witness was obviously a fake. The stepmother said that according to the witness, she tricked him and led him into a trap. She said that Sila, an inferior she knows, would never go alone with a strange man to a bar. But the protagonist tried to justify herself by saying she had no choice. But the stepmother said she came back from that place unharmed. The protagonist said she put up all her strength to resist, and then jumped out of the first-floor window. The stepmother asked if she was saying that a frail 19-year-old girl in heeled shoes had safely jumped out of the window and escaped from the two men. Roel realized that if she mentioned the sacred power, they would have more arguments for her guilt. She didn't know if it was over. At that moment, a sword was presented to the protagonist's neck. Roel asked what the Imperial Knight was doing here. It was Gain Scar. He said he was here to arrest a girl on suspicion of the murder of Viscount Schwalt. But the protagonist asked him if he had the authority to arrest her, didn't he? The protagonist wondered if their brave and law enforcement officers don't do arrests, but she didn't realize if they dumped it all on the knights. But the girl realized she couldn't hide from him. Gain is not an authority, but he has the right. He said it was about the murder of his friend and he was responsible for what was happening. At this point, the stepmother stood up and asked the man to take care of her unfortunate daughter. But the main character walked past the guy and said she could go on her own. She said so the guy wouldn't dare touch her with his dirty hands. The protagonist lay on the bed and thought. She realized that she had a history of putting people in dungeons, but this was the first time she had been there herself. She didn't realize that if she was found guilty, she'd be executed. But the protagonist thought she couldn't die so soon. She thought that if she were to die, she would drag Gain down to the underworld with her. Two men stood at the camera looking in. The first asked if it was her. The second said that there were two others, and it must be her. The protagonist asked what they wanted from her. The first guy said her mother asked her to take good care of her. The second guy said the girl should never lie on the stand. Roel couldn't believe her stepmother was serious about sending two puppies to her stepdaughter. One of the guys said that the main character wasn't afraid. He said that they would have a fun and friendly game if she behaved well. The protagonist sighed, and afterwards she punched the man. She suggested they play a game. She said she was ready to go 24/7 and asked the guys what about them. At that moment, a maid appeared and turned to Ingrid. The main character smiled and greeted the maid. The maid asked the protagonist how she was doing here. Roel laughed and said it wasn't very good. After a while, the protagonist was playing cards with the guys. The first man said that Roel won again. The other guy was angry and said she didn't even give roses to them to win. The main character asked the maid how things were going at home. The maid said that apart from the fact that the Countess had allowed her to visit the protagonist, nothing had changed. The protagonist thought that her stepmother must be very interested in how she was doing, because she had even sent her a maid. Roel told the maid to tell her stepmother that she was on the verge of dying here. She said it would help her. The racing girl was surprised but agreed. She asked if she was sure everything would be all right in court, but Roel reassured her. But really, the protagonist thought the maid should be worried because she's in big trouble. At this point, one of the guys asked the protagonist if everything was okay. Roel thought she had beaten him up so badly that he had moved his head and was now and genuinely worried about her. She thought it was a miracle and no other. The main character said that she said she wouldn't just die and said not to worry, although she said the same thing before she went to the Dark Lord's castle. But Roel knew she couldn't die this time. The next day in the courtroom, the unknown man told the protagonist that just like the procuressor said, Sila Inferio is accused of murdering Viscount Schwalt. The pawns of the fringe all as one kept saying that the Countess's stepdaughter, Sila Inferio, had always been displeased with her fiancé. Suddenly, the protagonist's lover showed up. The Viscount was an obstacle to their love, so they killed him in the bar. They allegedly planned everything that happened that day. And of course, the protagonist saw both witnesses and her lover for the first time. Roel thought she was watching a theater performance. She thought it would have been a great show if she hadn't been in the lead. At this point, the priest asked for the last witness to be invited, after which they would give the accused the floor. The main character didn't understand why she had to say anything else. The whole production literally rendered her speechless. She thought it would be better to just run away. At this point, the priest was surprised, and said that according to the rules they should have heard Gain Scar as the last witness, but that he was too busy and had sent a representative in his place. The protagonist looked at the guy who walked into the room and thought it couldn't be. The priest approached the guy and told him to sign here. The protagonist couldn't believe it was a Gain representative. She didn't realize they were joking. The guy was thanked for his cooperation, and he said the witness had arrived. The Emperor's so-called watchdog captain of the Special Forces unit, Yuche's litter. In addition to the knights, the Emperor has another line of defense. The Imperial Watchdogs are a Special Forces unit. All they care about is power. Unlike the knights, who honor their ancestry, they don't care about your past, your lineage. If you're strong, you can join their ranks. That's why they're considered the strongest unit in the world, and this man is their captain. Yuche said he's not a representative, he's a witness. He said he'd just tell you everything he saw. The main character didn't realize what was going on because the guy wasn't there at the time. Yuche said that on that day, the main character jumped out of the first-floor window of a bar and landed on the ground, looked round and ran away. Roel realized that he had actually seen everything. Yuche said that afterwards he could clearly hear the voice of the Viscount swearing strongly, so the protagonist could not be guilty of killing him. The protagonist couldn't imagine where he could be hiding then, but she realized that this was her chance. The main character said that Yuche was right. She said she jumped out of the window to escape the Viscount. She said she had no idea what happened to him afterwards. She pointed her finger at her lover and said it was the first time she'd ever seen him. The judge hesitated and asked who then killed the Viscount. Roel said she didn't know that. She said that when she left, he was still alive and it was better to ask Gain about it. She said that when she ran away, he was still on the ground floor of the bar. The judge said that since there was evidence in the defense, they had to make sure it was credible. He said they would start the questioning. The protagonist realized there was no Gain here. She thought it was just a bunch of morons and Captain Yuche. After a while, the judges said that due to the lack of evidence proving guilt, the protagonist was found not guilty. After Roel went outside from the sigh of relief, for she was glad to be saved. At that moment, Yuche approached her and addressed her. The protagonist asked what was wrong. She asked if he needed anything, but she said she had to thank him first. She thanked the guy for helping her. But Yuche asked the protagonist if he could talk to her. Roel said of course, because he'd lifted the burden of the accusation, and now she had plenty of free time. Afterwards, they traveled somewhere in Korea. On the way, the protagonist asked if they were going to the palace. Yuche nodded and said that was correct. The protagonist realized that they would probably head straight to the palace squad headquarters. She could hardly guess why. Roel asked how His Highness the Crown Prince was doing. Yuche said it was relatively good, but he still blames himself for what happened. Roel asked if it was because of the Paladin role. She didn't understand if he blamed himself because she sacrificed her life to save him. Yuche nodded silently to the girl. Roel said she didn't think it made sense. She said that no one would want the rescued to blame themselves for their rescue. He said that the title of Paladin implies a willingness to give one's life at any moment, so... But at this point, the guy interrupted her and told her to stop talking nonsense. He pissed off the main character. She thought she knew better and didn't understand why he even cared. She didn't see the point of a whole bunch of people mourning the dead like that. After a while, they arrived. Roel realized it was a Special Forces unit, but she thought she hadn't been here in 100 years. As soon as she joined the Paladins, she had to occasionally be at their beck and call. But as the protagonist was climbing the stairs, a gun flew past her. Roel was frightened and didn't realize what was happening. At this point, the protagonist saw the guy and pounced on him. Afterwards, she stabbed him in the leg. She realized that in the past, his leg would have been broken. The unknown guy was just dodging the main character's punches and jumping back. At this point, the guy turned to the commander. The protagonist was about to respond because she thought he was calling her. She realized that he was saying it to Captain Yuche. The guy told the commander that the girl didn't look like her. He said she was using holy power and he could confirm that. She said her power was unprecedented. At that moment, the protagonist approached Yuche and asked to borrow a sword. Yuche was surprised and asked again what she had just said. Roel said that they must have mistaken her for someone else. She said that since they'd already admitted their mistake, she was right to get even with the guy. She said she could beat the crap out of him without a weapon, so she asked to borrow a sword. She asked if he was his subordinate, right? The guy asked the commander he wouldn't give the girl Kalidos, would he? But at that moment, Yuche drew his sword and said that they were indeed at fault. Afterwards, he gave the sword to Ingrid. The protagonist smiled and told the guy to beg for mercy. After that, the guy started running away from the protagonist. After a while, she stopped and looked around. She realized that this guy was too fast for her. But that's when she noticed the training racks. After one punch, she smashed them. The main character thought it was a pretty good sword. She even liked this sword and thought maybe she should just steal it. At this point, another guy asked the protagonist if it wasn't a Kalitos. He said it was the captain's sword. Roel explained that she had borrowed it. Roel asked if he thought she'd stolen it from the Special Forces captain. After that, the guy agreed and said it was impossible to steal anything from him. At this point, the protagonist told the guy that there was a lightning nasty rat with blonde hair inside from the squad. She asked if he knew him. He asked if the main character was talking about the crow. He said that if he's escaped, he's somewhere very far away. At this point, he asked the protagonist who she was. The protagonist introduced herself and gave her name. At this point, she almost introduced herself as the Paladin Roel. The guy introduced himself in response. His name is Latra, but he said everyone calls him Lottie. At this point, the protagonist asked the guy if he knew her. Lottie said the captain had brought her here and asked if he'd told her anything. Lottie pointed to the sword and asked if that wasn't confirmation. He said that since the girl had the Kalitos, it was already decided. Roel didn't understand what it all meant. She remembered that the boy had said something strange here too. She thought it would be better to ask the captain directly. She asked Lottie where the captain was now. After the guy brought the main character in and said he had to be here. Then he started running away and said that where the Demon King is, there he is. Roel hoped they weren't talking about the real Demon King. She thought it must be someone else. At this point, she knocked on the door and was told to come in. There were two men in the room. An unknown man greeted the protagonist and said he was very happy to see them. The main character said she was here to get that sword back, although she didn't want it back. The unknown man got angry and said that the Kalitos was a gift from His Majesty and a symbol of the specific duties of a squad captain. He said it was bad enough to forget it anywhere, and Yuchez gave it to a stranger. The man said that as an assistant captain, it was hard for him to see that his boss was happy with the situation. Yuchez asked if he wasn't allowed to borrow it. The deputy told him, "Of course you can't." He said to be more careful from now on. Afterwards, the protagonist gave the guy the sword. She said she didn't manage to catch that cheeky guy, but she thanked the guy for lending her his sword. Yuchez said he's always running away. Now it was clear to Roel why the boy had lent her his sword. At this point, she decided to get straight to the point. She asked why they had brought her here. At this point, the deputy told the protagonist that everything that would be said now must remain secret. Roel said that they must realize that no one would believe her now anyway, even if she wanted to tell. But the deputy said if a word leaks out, the girl's in trouble. The main character said it was very interesting. At that moment, the deputy told the girl that the demon king who had cursed the prince was related to the Inferio family. The guy said that, simply put, the likelihood of Count Iferio's involvement in the crown prince's assassination attempt is very high. Roel realized that if you thought about it that way, it was impossible. She wondered why she hadn't thought of it before. Roel thought that, on the other hand, it was just a guess that Count Inferio intended to kill the crown prince through a contract with the demon king. But for a nobleman to be obliged to sacrifice his child for the sake of a contract, it would have to be a complicated contract. The protagonist asked why she was then. The deputy said he wanted to make sure of something. He said that the protagonist, because of the Iferio family, was the most suitable victim for the contract. He said that becoming the protagonist's victim to the Demon King was to gain some kind of magical protection. So to see if that's true, they had to play rough. But the deputy said they didn't expect the girl to have holy powers. He said that therefore she wasn't a victim. But most importantly, the heroine realized that she was still the victim, or rather her body, not her soul. The deputy said he'd been told that the protagonist was skillful with holy power. The protagonist said that in the past she had met Sir Roel. The deputy asked if the girl was talking about the Paladin's captain. The main character said she always dreamed of going to a church ministry. She realized that only the churchmen would know how to use the holy power, and only to them could it be granted. Roel said that the boy probably already knew that the situation in her family was not the most peaceful, so Roel taught her some self-defense techniques. The protagonist said he even said he would help her join the ranks of the Paladins when he returned. Roel thought a little lie wouldn't kill anyone, but she is both Sila and Roel, so she can just pretend she said it to herself. But Yuchez said that the protagonist can use her power, so there's no way she can be related to the Demon King. The main character said that of course she did, but she realized it had something to do with the Demon King. The last time they saw each other, she almost killed him. She thought that just a little more and it would be over. The deputy asked the protagonist if he could ask to be her spy in the Count's house. He said they already had one, but if it was a family member, even if untrained, it would be better for them. The main character was surprised that they already had a spy and asked if she could find out who it was. The deputy said it was a secret. She didn't realize they still didn't trust her, but she realized that being a spy sounded good, but she realized that if they found out that she was the victim, there would be a lot of problems. Those who contract with the demon king are demons, and those who are sacrificed are sentenced to death or exile. But the heroine believed that if she met with a high priestess who could see souls, she would be accepted as a role, not a Sila. At this point, the main character said she would become their spy, but she had one condition. She asked Ukase he is after all their monthly visits to the Supreme to get the blessing right. The main character asked him to take her with him when he went to see her just once. Ukase wanted to agree, but the deputy stopped him and said that you can't take just anyone to the Supreme. The main character realized that that's what they're like, they're helpers. She thought that if no one got caught, she could. At this point, the main character proposed marriage to Ukase. She asked if getting married was too much. Roel asked what about the engagement. She said her fiancé was dead anyway. She said that as her fiancé, Ukase could rightly get involved in her family's intrigues. Roel said she's the only heir to the Elfario family, which means Ukase will be the next head of the family. The deputy was surprised and said that the girl's fiancé had just passed away and the arrival of a new one in such a short period of time would tarnish her reputation. But the main character said she didn't care. She said that getting to the church was all she cared about. She asked if that was impossible for Captain Ukase. But the deputy said he didn't have a fiancé. The protagonist offered to train then. Ukase asked the deputy what he thought. The deputy said it was actually a good decision. He said that although at first the scandal could not be avoided, but so, if they had no other choice, they would eliminate the count, making the captain the new head of the family. Ukase looked at the main character and said he didn't mind. After the protagonist took the guy's hand and said they had a deal. Afterwards, she wanted to address the deputy, but she didn't know his name. The deputy said his name was Orson Furson. The protagonist was surprised and asked if he was a Sicarius demon, but the deputy said that was in the past. Roel asked if he had been sentenced to execution, but the deputy said it was fortunate that he was pardoned, but he explained that he was not authorized to leave Special Forces headquarters, so it could be considered a kind of life sentence. The main character was in shock. She was surprised by the Special Forces unit, reminded her that the turmoil in Sicarius took place decades ago. Roel told the deputy that he was perfectly preserved. The deputy said everyone tells him that, but the main character didn't realize if this was normal. She thought they were in the palace after all. The deputy asked the protagonist if she was scared. Roel was angry and thought that if he knew who she was, he wouldn't have had the heart to say it. She wondered if he was trying to provoke her. I mean, you don't know who he is, which frankly pissed her off. At this point, the protagonist calmed down and said that she had lost control, but she said she really wasn't afraid of anything. The deputy said he didn't doubt it, especially after they watched her chase the crow. But he said that first, the heroine should take a bath and then change into fresh clothes. He said that since she was now the captain's fiancée, she couldn't disgrace him. After a while, the main character was lying in the bathtub and thought it was really cool. At first, the deputy of course tried to get her into a private bath, but when she demanded a bigger bathtub, he instantly agreed. But the protagonist thought that there was nothing to be surprised about, because it was a unit directly linked to the royal family. She thought the poor people of the Holy Church were no match for them. Remembering her past life, the protagonist began to have doubts again. She realized that even if she and Captain Ukase met with the Supreme, she wouldn't have to become a paladin again. And if everything goes according to plan, the entire Elfario family fortune will be hers. The main character also wanted to live richly. She wanted to buy delicacies. She had no idea what else to spend her money on. She thought that probably only those who know how to spend money properly know how to handle it in principle. The protagonist decided that she would think about it again. Afterwards, the protagonist went to the mirror. She realized that she had a lean body, soft skin, not a single flaw. Beautiful but too weak. Roel didn't see how with a body like that she could even return to her service. The protagonist was sitting in her room, and at that moment Ukase walked in on her. Roel thanked him for letting her bathe in the big tub. She asked where the Orzen was. Ukase explained that he had gone to get new clothes for the girl. The main character was happy when she saw the pudding. She didn't realize it was for her. She was very fond of pudding. Churchmen rarely get such sweets. But at that moment, the protagonist saw that the guy was eating it himself. She realized he was really eating it. She thought that even if he hadn't brought it for her, he could have at least offered it to her. But at this point, the protagonist turned to Yuchez and the latter asked what was wrong. Roel went up to him and said she wanted pudding too. After Yuchez fed her from a spoon, the main character said it was delicious. The guy replied that their chef was very talented. The protagonist said she wanted more and asked for a scoop of caramel. After a while, the deputy entered the room and asked what they were doing here. The protagonist and the Yukizi answered at the same time that they were eating pudding. The deputy said he could see they were eating pudding, but he asked why one spoonful. They looked at the deputy with a look of surprise, and on their foreheads it was written, "And who cares?" The deputy sighed and said he didn't care anymore. He told the main character that he had brought clothes for her. He told her to hurry up and change. He said he reminded her to change over there just in case. After the protagonist changed clothes and asked about the engagement ceremony, Yuchez asked if there was such a ceremony. But the deputy said it was a chance not to be missed. He said that if she went to the Aario estate, they could find the Count's accomplices there. The protagonist was surprised and asked again. The deputy asked if she thought the Count had managed to do everything alone. Roel realized that it was also the right thing to do. She realized that the Countess's family could also be involved in all this. The deputy told the protagonist not to keep such a low profile with them. He said that after all, she was the captain's fiancée. Roel nodded and said she understood that. The deputy said she even changed her mood too quickly. At this point, the protagonist said she wanted a Kali as an engagement present, but the deputy interrupted her and said no. The protagonist asked if they could then provide her with some weapons for self-defense. She said that she was sure her stepmother might well send someone to her in the night. After being found not guilty, the likelihood of her doing something even that risky is very high. The deputy said that Roel could go to the armory and pick it out in person. He told Yuchez to take her there, and he agreed. But the deputy said the guy should escort her not only to the armory, but then home. The deputy said that when he got home, he would teach him a lesson or two on how to treat his fiancée and other useful things. He said Yuchez wouldn't dare run away. Afterwards, the protagonist set off with her boyfriend, but she couldn't catch up with him. She realized that the deputy had brought very uncomfortable shoes for her, and she couldn't catch up with the guy. Well, at that moment, she accidentally bumped into him. Yuchez asked, wondering if he should carry her. But Roel said that wasn't necessary. She said the guy should just walk slower. But at this point, the protagonist realized that she couldn't agree before, but now she's a noblewoman and he's her fiancé, so there's nothing wrong with that. That's when she told the guy to carry her. After that, Yuchez lifted the main character in his arms. She thought it was really great. Were they ladies who were corseted, or battle mates unable to fight anymore? Roel has carried them in her arms countless times, but this is the first time she's been carried. She thought she was very tired. After a while, Yukazi told the protagonist to wake up and choose. After the guy lowered her to the ground, and Roel was very surprised at the variety of weapons. She started to draw her weapon and wondered if she could really take anything. Yuchez said it was up to her discretion. After a while, the protagonist realized that she had gained too much. She said she'd only take what she could hide then. She asked the guy if he could lend her a horse. Yuchez had no problem agreeing. Roel thought he was a really nice man. She thought he even shared his pudding with her. After a while, the protagonist was standing outside stroking a horse. She thought that if Snowy knew she was riding another horse, she would be angry. But this horse she would only borrow for a while. At this point, the protagonist thanked Yukazi. She asked him if his horse was here too. After Yuchez brought his horse, the main character started stroking him too and asked him what his name was. Yuchesh, the horse's name is Black. The main character asked the deputy must have swore for a long time when the guy decided to call him that. Yuchez was surprised and asked the girl how she had guessed. But that's because she had the same thing. But the protagonist said she thinks Black is a good name too. Yuchez smiled and said he agreed. After a while, the protagonist came home and the maid met her, asked if she was okay. Roel said she was fine and the charges had been dropped. She said she'd talked her way out of it. The maid said it was really great. She said that Roel had no idea how worried she was. At this point, the main character said she had a new fiancé. The maid was surprised. She asked if the Countess had again found the girl a suspicious match. But Roel said that this time she picked it out herself. The maid breathed a sigh of relief and asked who he was. But the maid was very surprised when she heard that he was a Yuki's leader, captain of a special forces unit. The maid asked if this wasn't the kind of squad they used to recruit hardened criminals. She said she'd heard the captain was a creep. The protagonist said that this squad can indeed include criminals, but that doesn't mean it's only made up of them. She said that Captain Yuchez is a wonderful man. She said she saw him eating pudding and said she wanted some too, and he immediately shared it with her. But the maid said the lad was strange after all. She asked how he could let his mistress eat pudding that he had already eaten himself. Roll was surprised and asked, but wasn't it for the best? But the maid said it was unacceptable. She asked if there was any in it because letting someone eat what you've already eaten is very rude. But the protagonist remembered that girls in her past life always liked everything, used or not. She said he also gave her a dress, a necklace, and a bracelet. And shoes. The maid asked if it was all shabby too. Roel said she thinks she did. The maid asked why her mistress was not having the slightest bit of luck in life. But the main character said that at least he's better than her last fiancé. The maid said that's right. She said she heard that the captain of the special forces is the strongest knight in the kingdom. The protagonist objected and said that the Paladin commander was also very strong. The maid was surprised and asked if the squad captain was stronger. But the protagonist said that she had never fought him, so it was still unknown. But at this point, the maid advised the girl to pull herself together. She said it used to be allowed, but now she's the fiancée of a special forces captain. The maid said she needed to teach the main character the basics of etiquette before the engagement. But she said not to be afraid of anything. She said that she had been serving the protagonist for a long time, and she already knew what to do and how to do it. The protagonist thought that if she had known about it beforehand, she wouldn't have said a word about the engagement. After a while, another maid told the protagonist that the Countess was expecting her and asked her to follow her. Then Roll passed into a luxurious room which surprised her. She realized that it was different from the old hull of the manor she lived in. It was much better there. The protagonist realized that if the plan succeeded, it would all be hers. She thought that after years of living in poverty, she would finally be able to live in luxury. She thought that after years of living in poverty, she would finally be able to live in luxury. Afterwards, the stepmother told Roel to come in quickly. She said that first of all, she congratulated her on her acquittal in court. Roel told her stepmother that if she had any more confidence in her, she would have thought she was really happy. The stepmother said that of course she was happy. After all, the girl had come back safe and sound after all. Roel said it must have been out of concern for her safety that she had sent a couple of people to the dungeon to keep an eye on her. The stepmother said any mother would have done the same in her place and said the girl might not thank her. There was silence afterwards. The protagonist told the woman that if she had something to say, let her speak faster. The stepmother said it was nothing. She said the girl's fiancé, the Viscount, died a horrible death, so she'd already found her a few more suitors. But Roll said it wasn't necessary. The stepmother asked what the girl was talking about. She said that she was not a little girl anymore and that she should settle down soon. But the main character said she already has a fiancé. The main character said she met her soulmate and it's all thanks to her stepmother. Roll told the woman she didn't know if she had heard, but she told her that Captain Yuchez's leader had come to the trial as a witness, and it was his testimony that saved her. The protagonist said that if it wasn't for him, she must be awaiting her execution right now. The protagonist said she was engaged to Captain Yuchez. Roll realized that the woman was definitely not happy. The man who was investigating her had become the protagonist's fiancé. Roel was sure her stepmother was furious. The stepmother asked the girl if she'd been too hasty. She said he didn't have a very good reputation and she should think again. But Roel said she thought he was a wonderful man. She said she wanted to have their engagement ceremony as soon as possible. But she said they had to follow customs. She said they should meet with the Earl first. Then, after he gives his blessing, choose a date for the wedding. The protagonist realized that Sila had spent a week in unconsciousness, then was almost raped, then accused of murder. So many things had happened, but he never showed up, not even to comfort her. The protagonist asked if her father was really interested in her marriage. The stepmother said of course she was interested. She said she would talk to him about a suitable time. Roel said to hurry then, for Captain Yuchez is not a patient man. The stepmother agreed, but asked if the protagonist could first meet the people she had picked out for her. She said there were some pretty attractive ones among them. But the main character said she wasn't interested in looks. She thought that no one could be more beautiful than her. She saw the most beautiful creature in the mirror every day, so she couldn't be taken in by her looks. but the stepmother said she still hoped that, in the name of their family, she would at least come to the banquet. Roel thought maybe this wasn't a bad chance. She said she'd only go if her stepmother invited Captain Uchez to it. The stepmother agreed and said she would send him an invitation. She said that the banquet would be in 3 days, so we should prepare properly. The maid was surprised that the banquet was in 3 days. She said 3 days was too short. She said that the main character doesn't even know how the banquets go. But Roel said there were actually some things she remembered: smiling, being friendly, and just dancing. In the past, she was a frequent guest at banquets. Every banquet she was bathed in the adoration of the ladies. The protagonist wondered if she could have missed them, so she is very familiar with banquets. The maid asked the girl if she remembered how to dance. Roel started dancing with the maid and said sure, but the maid said the girl had just danced the male part. She said it turned out well but asked why she only remembered the male part. The main character realized that it was because she had only danced the male part before. She didn't realize how she could learn in just 3 days and thought it would be a failure. But she said not to worry. She said that even if she had to forget about sleep, she would help her learn to dance. The maid said that of course some other formalities could not be overlooked. She suggested that we should try our best together. After a while, the main character said she wasn't going anywhere. She thought she'd only slept 3 hours and just wanted to be left alone. All night she rehearsed the same thing. It was too much sleep. The main character asked what her stepmother wanted from her. She said if it was something important, let her go to her. The maid asked what the inappropriate attitude was. She said the protagonist had to go to her. Roel asked what would happen if she refused. Would she be dragged away by force? The maid said she'd have to if she didn't stop behaving like that. She asked not to keep the countess waiting. But Roel thought a maid was just a servant with so much arrogance. She realized that Silva was clearly nobody's idea of a good time. Although the protagonist wanted to get it over with, she was a little worried about Sophia. She thought it would be a good idea to get her out of here before the commotion started. The protagonist thought that when she confirmed her identity, she could hide her in the church. But that would have to wait. At that moment, the protagonist called the maid over to her. The maid asked what was wrong, but Roel said she'd go to the countess. But she told the maid to know that for her to kill a rat hiding behind a fox is like snapping her fingers, so she told the maid to be more polite. The protagonist said that whether her patron is a fox or a tiger, a rat is always a rat. Afterwards, the stepmother told the protagonist to take a seat. Roel asked what she needed. The stepmother told the girl that she's been very fastidious lately. But Roel said she'd been on the brink of death twice, so she'd learnt to appreciate every second of her time. But her stepmother said she shouldn't take her anger out on her innocent mother. The main character told the countess that she truly admired her steadfastness. She said it was really amazing, but she told the woman to say what she wanted to say sooner still. The countess asked if she couldn't just want to see her daughter. The main character asked if she'd just summoned her here like some kind of trained dog. The countess said it was very rude. But the protagonist said that even if she seems weak, it doesn't mean she has nothing to answer a woman with. At this point, the maid told Roel that she was already being too rude to the countess, and the protagonist asked, and so what? She asked if she's going to hit her now, but the maid said that's not what she meant. Roel said to just shut up then, but the maid shouted that it was too much. The main character said that the maid tried to hit her. She told her stepmother that the maid was terribly ill-mannered and asked if she could whip her. The stepmother asked the protagonist for mercy and said that she would teach the maid a lesson. I said if that's it, she's leaving. But the stepmother said she had already informed the Earl of her engagement. The stepmother said he wasn't very happy that she had chosen Captain Uchez as her groom. The protagonist asked if he didn't approve. She thought it looked like the Count had something to hide. The stepmother said he didn't say it outright, but she assumed he was strongly against it. The stepmother tells the protagonist that she is the heiress of the Inferio family and should not be so careless in choosing a groom. Roel asked, and Viscount Schwartz meant fit. Stepmother said at least he had a clean reputation. The main character thought it was very funny. She didn't understand if her stepmother was afraid that they would lose their position. Uchez has been chosen by the Emperor himself, and his patron is General Harwa. The protagonist realized that if he married her, he would take over as head of the family in no time. She said that if his reputation was the only problem, she could find a guarantor. The protagonist thought that once she confirmed her identity, it would be easy to find a guarantor. Supreme, Empress Dowager, Prince and Emperor. Deputy Paladin General, son of the Duke of Irhas, the godfather of the protagonist, Prime Minister Mord. Role as an amplified paladin has very serious connections, but the stepmother said there's nothing to be gained by being a bail bondsman. She said that as captain of the special forces, he is not a citizen of the kingdom. She said they don't know what his background is, so they can't let him into their family so easily. She said it was against their traditions. The main character didn't realize what a lousy excuse it was because the Afarios aren't royalty. The stepmother said it was all for her own good. She said that if she married a man of unknown origin, she would regret it in the future. The protagonist thought that the stepmother would surely send someone after her in the night. She said it was her problem and she'd deal with the consequences herself. At that moment, the butler came running in and told the countess that the Yuchas had arrived, and said he wanted to see the young mistress. The countess was angry and told the butler to find an excuse and send him away. She said it was rude to arrive without prior notice. She asked the butler if he couldn't handle even such a trifle. At this point, the stepmother asked the protagonist if she wanted to see it. But Roel said there was nothing to see. She realized it wasn't a battlefield, so it wouldn't be too hard for him to get in. After the guards shouted at the countess to leave because they couldn't stop the guy, Roel realized that Yuchez had overdone it. She thought it wasn't really a war, but it felt like one. The countess jumped up and asked where the captain of the guard was. She said to send him to her at once, but she was told that the captain was knocked out by Yuchez. Roel realized that the guards couldn't stop him. She thought that she could compete with him, except for her. The countess asked if he had injured or killed someone, but the knight told her he didn't. He said he only knocked them out and didn't hurt anyone. The countess told them to fight to the death then. She said that if someone was seriously injured, she would compensate them 20 times over, and if someone died, she would give their family a portion of their land. The protagonist realized that the countess was plotting bloodshed. She didn't realize that the woman was trying to corner the Yuchez. She thought she might have to intervene. At that moment, Yuchez appeared. The countess asked him if he was too self-made. He said he dared to break into their house and asked how he dared to disrespect their kind. But Yuchez said he just went in for Lady Inferio. The protagonist was surprised because she didn't understand why the guy looked so exhausted. She realized that the guards couldn't have crushed him so badly and that something was wrong. But at that moment, she noticed the bags under his eyes. She realized that it looked like he had been through the same torture as she had. The protagonist realized that Orzen was definitely stricter, but Yuchez still came after her, even in that state. But she thought it meant he'd simply run away to her. She understands his motives perfectly well, for Orzen would have let him leave just to meet her. At that moment, the countess shouted to Yuchez that if he really loved her daughter, he would not dare. She said that he should have warned them of his visit at least 24 hours in advance. But the main character said that they had actually agreed to meet today. She said she just forgot to mention it. Afterwards, the protagonist said goodbye to her stepmother. Afterwards, the protagonist showed the guy the dessert and asked how he liked it. But then she noticed that Yuchez was just lying on the table and asked if Orzen had tortured him. After the main character started stroking the guy's head and asked him why he was being so hard on himself, she said that if he couldn't take it, he should just say no. But Yuchez said he didn't want to let the girl down. He said if he acted normal, he'd get her in trouble. But the heroine told him not to worry about it. She told him to just keep up appearances and the rest was nothing. But Yuchez said the deputy warned that that's exactly what the main character would say. Yukesi said that even if Lady Eferio did not see anything wrong with his behavior, it could be detrimental to her reputation, since he was her fiancé. So he demanded that Yuchez watch his manners. Roel asked how many times he repeated it. Yuchez covered his face with his hands and said 23 times. Roel realized that he wouldn't have had to train with her if it hadn't been for her desire to meet the Highness. Now she was ashamed of him for all his torment. The protagonist asked when the guy planned to rejoin the squad. Yuchez said the later the better. Roel asked how about taking a nap once they finished eating. She promised she wouldn't sleep for too long. Afterwards, the protagonist started spoon-feeding the guy and told him not to bother. Yuchez said that the deputy also said that it was unseemly for two people to eat from the same spoon. But the protagonist said there was another spoon. The protagonist realized that even if she really wanted to sleep, she couldn't go back to the manor. And the guy doesn't even have a house of his own. He said it was too hard to keep track of the whole estate, so he just gave it to someone. So they have no other options left. The protagonist said she heard there are many excellent hotels not far from the palace. Afterwards, The main character pointed out the hotel and said it was gorgeous. Yuchez motioned for the girl to hurry up. At that moment, he was stopped by Crown. He asked why they were going to a hotel in broad daylight, and he was simultaneously told that they were on their way to bed. Crown asked if they were really going to sleep, but looking at the couple, he realized that they were obviously on their way to bed, but he said that normal people would think they were here to do something else. Roel asked if he meant intercourse. Crown was outraged and said it was not proper for a lady to express herself like that, but the protagonist didn't think he was the type to care about propriety. Roel asked if they could use it then. She said let everyone decide that they were already there and then no one could stop them from getting married. Roel asked Ukezi what he thought about it, but he said it was a bad idea. Crown said it was good that the commander still had a shred of common sense. He said the girl had stopped causing more problems. At this point, Crown started yelling at Ukezi and asked what he expected by breaking into their estate. He said that of course her family was furious. He said for the guy to take pity on him as it's hard for him to keep an eye on him as it is. Roel realized that he was following them. She realized that her senses had been weakened by the change of body. The main character said she was honestly tired and offered to come in separately. Crown sighed and said if they had nowhere else to go, they could stop by his place. He said he had plenty of rooms available. Afterwards, they came to the shopping district. Roel asked Crown if he was a merchant. Crown that he doesn't trade directly, but is connected to merchants in a certain way. The merchant associations come to the capital of the East and annually donate a large amount of money to the Holy Church. The protagonist realized that Crown was one of those who donates money. Crown told his maids to prepare 2 bedrooms and baths. The members of the Special Forces Squad and have connections with high-ranking members of trade associations around the world. But it seemed to the protagonist that the captain of the squad, appointed by the Emperor himself, must be a particularly powerful figure. The other members of the squad don't seem so extraordinary. The protagonist thought that since Crown was a member of the trade association, why did he join the Special Forces unit? She realized that this could be detrimental to his reputation. At this point, Crown turned to the protagonist and offered to talk. Roel saw his beastly look and realized that he hardly wanted to apologize for yesterday. She didn't realize if Orzen could have told him anything. But Crown asked the girl why she wanted their commander. Crown said he heard she was the one who suggested he get engaged. The main character thought she had the burden of popularity on her again. She says the guy is right, but it's just a calculation so he can calm down. Crown said that even if she could use holy power, but a girl from the Aario family couldn't be trusted. But Roel said that Yuchez didn't trust her completely, so he had nothing to worry about. She realized that otherwise he would have told her who the spy in the Count's house was. She said that even if they do get married, it's none of his business. After the protagonist burst into Ukezi's room and said his subordinate was bullying her. But Crown said it was slander. He told the girl the captain was washing up and asked where she was going. The protagonist said of course to the bathtub. Crown told her to stop because he had to be completely naked now. But Roel said she'd seen it all before and it wouldn't shock her. It was inevitable for her in the summer. Crown said that since things had turned out this way, the girl should take responsibility. Roel was surprised and asked why. Crown said that since she had already managed to get hold of the commander, she should take responsibility now. But at that moment, Yuchez appeared and asked what was going on here. Roel tells him that Crown claims she somehow managed to swear at him. Yuchez was surprised and said he wasn't. After the Crown left and the main character asked what was wrong with him, but Yuchez said he didn't know. Roel thought that since they had been given the same room, she couldn't hope for a shirt. But for her, the dream was a dream, in a dress or in a shirt. At that moment, Yuchez came out of the bathtub. The main character saw something and took off his dressing gown. Roel said the Emperor took Yuchez at the age of 20. There's a skilled healer in the Special Forces unit, but his body is all scarred, which means he got them when he was very young. The main character asked who did it. She thought he got the scars when he was 15, maybe even earlier. Yuchez said he couldn't tell. He said he forbade him to talk about the past, but the main character said she'd keep it a secret. She swore in the name of the goddess. When a churchman breaks a vow made in the name of the goddess, he immediately loses God's blessing, in other words, holy power. There is nothing worse for churchmen. The main character said that although she is not yet serving the church, she will start soon, so Yuchez can believe her. Roel realized that of course it was very risky. The general was adamantly against such a thing, but she wouldn't tell anyone about it. Yuchez said it could hurt the girl, but the main character said it was okay. She said that even though they were forced together, it wasn't a bad thing. She said that because of their mutual trust, they don't have to worry about anything interfering with their plan. But Yuches said it wasn't that he didn't trust her. Roel said it's all right then. He believes her and she believes him. The main character swore that she would never tell Captain Yuchez's secret to anyone. Afterwards, they held hands and confirmed the contract. The main character asked the guy now he's going to tell. Yuches said it's the work of the demon clan. Roel asked if he had been sacrificed. Long ago, the goddess banished the demons far away to the northern lands and confined the humans to the black desert sand. So people almost stopped having contact with the demon, except when it came to making deals. You're right. Children are often used as a sacrifice to connect with the demonic clan. Yuches said it happened right after he was born. Roel said that the section about the demon clan, she understood why it was kept top secret. She said the guy really better not tell anyone about his past. Yuches said that's what everyone tells him. The main character didn't realize she'd been sacrificed, but now he's here. She realized that such a thing was impossible, unless he managed to get through the Black Desert. Yuches nodded, confirming the protagonist's hunch. Roel realized that just surviving in demon lands was already an impressive, but also to cross the Black Desert. She realized that even in the past, she and her sacred power would hardly have been able to do it. Whoever you are, but if you were involved in making a deal with a demon, you are sent into exile because, in most cases, the deal tightly binds the person to the demon. So the protagonist herself has to be careful not to tell the truth about herself until she meets the Supreme. Roel asked if the church knew about it. Yuches that on his own killed the demon to which he was sacrificed, so that the church accepted him. Afterwards, the main character didn't hug the guy and tell him he was a hero. She said it was unbelievable. She said she admired him. Afterwards, they fell asleep in each other's arms. After a while, the main character woke up. She remembered that she wanted to leave yesterday, but when she looked around, she realized that it was probably 5 o'clock in the morning. Afterwards, she looked at Yukazi and thought he was really cute when he slept. She didn't know whether to go to bed next or get up already. A little while later, Crown opened the door to the room and asked if they were awake in there. He asked if he had orders to make breakfast already. At that moment, he saw a sleeping couple. After a while, the food was cooked. Crown, you passed on the news from the Special Ops unit. He said they both had to come. He said as soon as they finished eating, they had to go. He said he'd already prepared a change of clothes. Roel asked incredulously. Crown was surprised and asked if she thought he would let the captain's fiancé in like that. Roel realized that she'd found a way to get some new clothes. She realized she just had to go to the Special Forces. The protagonist was shown a complaint that came from the Inferio's house about what happened yesterday. Roel said she and Captain Yuches were supposed to meet yesterday, but the guards got in the way, so they're the ones who got themselves in trouble. The deputy agreed, but said that, however, based on Mrs. Inferio's testimony, trouble was in store for them. Roel said she was sure to lecture her all day and all night. She said she was obviously up to something against her again. The deputy said it might be dangerous for her to come back then, but the main character said she wasn't and asked Yuches if she was right. Yuches said the girl could handle it. The deputy said as long as it's his opinion, it's fine, but he said he called the two of them for another reason. The protagonist said that she had forgotten that in 2 days' time there would be a reception at Iferio's house. She said she thought it would be difficult for Yuches. The deputy said it was very interesting, but he said it was the same day and they would need to attend another appointment. He said that in 2 days the bride of Yuches' litter is to be officially presented at a reception hosted by Princess Elania. The protagonist remembered that she was the arrogant princess. They didn't get along very well. Roel asked if she could not go, but the deputy said you can't. He said the girl wasn't even given a choice. The deputy said Captain Yuches had to get back to his diet lessons, and the girl, he said he'd rather go home and give the news to the countess. The main character didn't realize that Yuches looked very scared. She apologized to him in her mind. She realized they'd both been hurt, but it was all her fault. Roel thought she would have to repay him somehow and decided she would buy him something nice. At this point, Crown told the protagonist that they were talking about their engagement. He said he thought they were both bluffing. Inga realized this wasn't the best time for a not-so-great conversation, said it wasn't a real engagement. She decided she wasn't going to be nice to the guy because they're kind of the same age. Crown asked, but in the position wouldn't I be more advantageous to stay married? He said that if the Iferio family was found guilty, then the girl would be stripped of her title. A woman and staying with the captain's wife would be better for her than going into the church. He asked if he was wrong. The main character was not shocked. She didn't realize how it was that she couldn't inherit the Inferio family. Crown said that if they couldn't get rid of Mrs. Inferio, it would be suicide for Roll to stay in this house, so she couldn't find a better party than the captain anyway. Crown said that most likely she would be married off to some other Schwartz, who again would be on foot to the Countess. The main character didn't know what to do. She thought she'd move some of the property somewhere, but she thought it might be confiscated. She really wanted the house and thought she'd be rich. The main character thought it was the goddess leaving her no choice but to return to the church. The main character said she gave her 20 years. At this point, Crown asked the protagonist if she was listening to him at all. He said that overall she's in the clear, but only if she doesn't get divorced. So she can say all she wants that their marriage is fake, but he knows that, deep down, she doesn't think so. Roll said that she might want to marry him, but she said he wouldn't exactly agree to it himself. Well, that's the main character moment I realized he might agree to. Crown told the girl that he had to go through a deity of danger and suffering from an early age. He said that outwardly the lad seemed rather harmless, but he had a fine and keen sense of sense. Roll told Crown that he knew the captain well. Crown that he's under his supervision. At that moment, the protagonist realized what the boy had just said, but she realized that he had spent his childhood in the demon lands. She didn't understand how that was possible. Roll asked the guy if he was really looking out for him and taking care of him. Crown said that although he looks young, he's actually much older than the captain, but the main character didn't realize that wasn't the problem. She realized that if the guy was with Yuchez of demonic territory, then he was either a demon himself or had also been sacrificed. If he's older than Yuchez, then he's probably from a demon clan. Crown asked, wondering if something was wrong. She realized what else was wrong, but still she couldn't tell what she knew about Yucchese's past, so she decided to ask after her meeting with the Supreme. The protagonist thought that if she knew about the captain's past, she should know about this guy too. The protagonist asked what the captain was like as a child. Crown told the girl to ask him herself. But Roll said she was interested in his opinion. She said that very few people remember themselves as children, but Crown said that Yuchez had told him first. Roll didn't understand if he was afraid that someone would find out that he was demonic. Roll BC what she couldn't even say she already knew. After the protagonist arrived, she was upset that she never got to hear about the man's childhood. Upon entering the house, the protagonist was greeted by the butler. Roll asked what he wanted. She didn't know who he was because she had never seen him before. The butler relayed that the Countess had ordered it to be conveyed that she was punished for frivolous behavior, and that she was henceforth under house arrest. Roll thought that she certainly realized that the Countess would find something to blame her for, but thought it was a bit much. The main character took out a letter and asked her to give it to her stepmother, because Her Highness Elania had invited her to the reception, so the punishment would have to be cancelled. And she said that the reception will take place in 2 days and let them forget about the house arrest and get ready. And she said that she and pay them to go, because she can't get there in the old tripe. The butler was frightened and said that in 2 days' time there would be a reception for the Countess. But Roll said that she could not refuse the princess, for then the honor of the family would suffer. She said the only way to refuse was to bury one of her parents. Roll told the butler to tell her stepmother that if she wanted her to come to her reception so badly, let her deal with the princess herself. 2 days later, the main character didn't think this day was coming. She thought she wouldn't live to see it. She thought Sophia was just awful. The main character didn't realize that it was only 2 days, and it was as if she had been tortured for a month. Now it even seemed to me that recently, and the Countess's act was somehow nice in its own way. Before the Countess asked the protagonist if she thought someone like her was worthy of a princess's reception, and Roll said she wasn't thrilled herself, but the princess had sent her the invitation. She asked, "So isn't what she said a direct insult to the princess?" But the stepmother said, "Don't exaggerate." She said she didn't mean to be insulting. She said she was just afraid the protagonist would embarrass herself there and cause trouble. She said that Roel used to be a wonderful child. The main character mentally apologized and said that the person she was talking about was gone. She asked if she could go. At this point in the match, the stepmother asked the protagonist if she was feeling sleepy. But Roel said not a drop. She wondered if the woman had made some sort of remark to her. Luckily, sleeping pills don't affect her thanks to holy power. The stepmother asked the girl what she was saying. She said she could understand a lot of things, but this is too much. She said she only cares about the girl, and that's what she says back to her. Well, at that point, Roel advised the woman to refrain from taking any risky ideas. She said that if anything happened to her, the special forces would not turn a blind eye. She asked if she wanted to give them a reason to search the estate. She said she hoped she'd come up with something better next time. The protagonist is very tired after a couple of days because of dancing etiquette and facetiousness, but she thought that now she only had to get there so nothing bad should happen. But if she wanted to sleep, she had not slept for the last 2 days. Roel wanted to sleep very badly. She realized she couldn't go on. It was at this point that she realized that they had been driving for a long time. She wondered where they were taking her. She realized it was definitely not the road to the squad. Roel realized it was her stepmother's doing again. She realized that was why she hadn't been seen lately. Roel tried to open the carriage, but it was locked. She picked up what appeared to be a locked door from the outside. There was no doubt in her mind now. Since weapons are forbidden to be brought to royal receptions, the protagonist wondered if she should. She thought it was a good thing she had brought it after all. After that, the main character blew the lock off with a dagger. She thought it was perfect. She realized that a heap of things were still calm and thought he probably hadn't noticed anything. After that, the protagonist jumped on top of the carriage. Kucha heard strange noises, and I looked around but saw nothing. He couldn't figure out what it was. The main character looked at the guy and thought he didn't seem particularly strong. After that, she jumped into his seat. Kucha wanted to say something, but the main character interrupted him and told him to shut up. She said she wouldn't even ask him anything, so he should keep quiet. She said she was betting that the Countess had arranged it. The main character told the couch to take her to the special ops unit. She said if he so much as flinched, she'd kill him. When the carriage arrived, Yuchez was surprised to see the main character. Roel shoved the coachman aside and greeted the lad. She apologized and asked if she was late. At this point, the deputy asked if she had been kidnapped. Roel was surprised and said she must have been kidnapped. She realized that it was indeed kidnappers. She thought who would have thought she would be kidnapped one day. She wondered what if someone told that to a paladin and they all laughed. The deputies said that the Earl's servants claimed that Roel had declined the invitation, so they were all arguing about whether or not to break through to her estate. Yuchez pulled the girl's hand and asked if she was whole. Roel was shocked. She thought who would have thought that a guy could be so gallant, and she thought that the deputy must have muscled in. Yuchez told the girl that he was sorry she had to go through all this, but Roel said it was no big deal. At this point, the deputy said they had little time left and needed to spend. At the entrance to the palace, the protagonist and Yuchez were met. He said he was captain of the Special Forces unit, Yuchez Litter, and he asked the main character to introduce herself. Roel bowed her head and introduced herself. She called her coachman Radu, for he had told her that she needed an invitation to get into the palace, so he took it from her and then tore it up. The main character did not think that it is a good thing that the invitation only reserves a place in the list can pass without it. But at that moment the knight said that someone had already passed under the name of Sila Inferio. Roel apologized, but asked if she could ask who it was. She realized that the coachman hadn't just torn up the invitation and handed it to someone else. The knight said it was Rowana Eferio. The protagonist didn't realize that they had sent her younger sister under her name. In principle, she realized, to get to the princess's reception was worth a lot. Roel said there was some kind of misunderstanding. She said she also came with Mr. Leader, so it's no big deal. The knight said that the girl was right, but asked Yuchez if it was true that he was not returning to pass accompanied by this lady. Yuchez threw and said he didn't mind. The knight agreed and told them to pass then. The main character stood looking at the castle in surprise. She thought her little sister was here. The same 17-year-old girl living outfits at her sister's house that she doesn't even wear. But she wants to get everything new, even if that new is someone else's. Roel realized that if her sister spotted her, she'd be sure to pick on her. At that moment, Yuchez looked at the main character and said he was worried about her. But Roel smiled and said she didn't have to. She said she wasn't that weak. But Yuchez said that's what makes him more worried. He said that since her family can't control her, they may resort to drastic methods. Aario said the boy was probably right. She said the guards on the estate were all weaklings and they wouldn't help her. The main character realizes that the guy is worried about her. It was very touching for her. She noticed that this time he was trying to walk at her speed, not like before. but she thought it might be the result of your 24-hour torture. At this point, the protagonist grabbed the guy's arm and pulled him behind her, telling him to follow her. Afterwards, they came to the balcony. Roel stood on the railing and stroked Eukias. Eukias looked at the main character strangely and called her name, but Roel said if he didn't like it, he could just say, but Eukias closed his eyes and said he liked it. Roel decided that she would pet him a little more then. The doors to the balcony opened and there was a couple standing in the entrance. They didn't apologize and left. Roel realized she'd forgotten there were still people here. She was uncomfortable and motioned for the guy to come inside. Eukias helped the girl down and agreed. As they entered, an unknown girl greeted them. Eukias and Roel looked at the girl in surprise, not realizing who she was. At that moment, she introduced herself. She is the Countess of Canal. She said that Sir Fersen had asked her to help them. Roel realized that the deputy had sent this girl. She realized that he probably didn't trust them anyway, even after the training. Camille said that at this reception and not for the first time will show the high society their relationship. So she asked us to try to be together all the time. Then she pointed to the side and said that Princess Elania was over there. Roel didn't want to say hello to the princess at all, because she was scared. She had already told her off 3 times in the past, so if she called for even a lock of her hair, she wanted to run away. Roel thought that who knew that they would meet again, and in such conditions even though she wouldn't recognize her. But Roel thought that actually, she wasn't so bad. She just wasn't trained enough in the past, and she hadn't made any mistakes. Eukias asked the protagonist what was wrong with her. Roel said she was just a little worried, but really she just wanted to run away. But at that moment, the protagonist was spotted by her sister and asked what she was doing here. Roel told her sister that she must have made a mistake, because she had never said she wouldn't come. The protagonist thought she could tell from her sister. She thought it was Roanna Aario, Sila's half-blood sister. At that moment, an unknown woman ordered the protagonist's sister to immediately freeze. She said it was very disrespectful to block someone's path to Her Highness. Roanna bowed and said she didn't mean to and apologized. The unidentified woman said that since nothing else is in the way, they can't go through and greet the princess. Afterwards, Eukias approached the princess and got down on his knee. He greeted the princess and said he was the captain of the Special Forces unit of the Kia services. But he said he was very grateful for the honor of being invited to the reception. The princess said that she should rather be grateful that he had accepted her invitation. And she said that His Majesty would be pleased if the boy went out even occasionally. She said she'd like to see him more often herself. But at that moment, Eukias looked at the protagonist as if asking what his answer to that was. Roel realized that they hadn't been trained for this. She mentally told the princess that Eukias probably hadn't been trained to respond to something like this yet. For now, his maximum reason for receiving her. Roel thought she should introduce herself then. The main character said her name and greeted the princess and thanked her for the invitation. At that moment, the princess told the girl to raise her head. She said that she was definitely the only one invited, but she asked how it was that Lady Roanna had come here like this. Roel was frightened. She didn't understand why the princess was so hard on her. She was already in a different body. At this point, she intervened in the conversation and said that her sister couldn't make the appointment, so she went instead. The princess didn't say anything to that, but told the main character to explain everything. Roel really wanted to run away, but she still had to answer. She said that she didn't want to blacken her family's reputation in front of a few people, but she said that unfortunately her younger sister was a kleptomaniac. At this point, Rona got angry and started screaming that it was all rubbish and her sister was lying. Well, that's when the princess ordered her to shut up. She said she'd already intervened 3 times and she was giving her one last chance. Roel smiled, but inside she knew it was very harsh. She said that like Skin, her younger sister told her, she often goes in other people's outfits and jewelry. She said she couldn't resist temptation. This time she stole the invitation too. Roel realized that of course her sister hadn't directly stolen it, but she had stolen it nonetheless. Roel said she had hoped to cover it up for the good of her family, but she said that since it had turned out this way, even this cauldron was proof of her words. The main character said that this necklace was given to her mother by her father. She said that the necklace is very expensive and made to order in the most famous jewelry shop in the capital, so confirm her words will not be difficult. Roel said that her mother had bequeathed it to her, and it had been kept with her until Roanna stole it. The main character was Rada, because she could not think that Sophia's constant lamentations could one day be translated. People were starting to fret that early on the seemingly nice girl was actually a thief. They didn't talk about how awful it was to trespass on someone else's inheritance, and they said that it seemed the Countess hadn't brought her up at all. At that moment, the princess said to explain now if what was said by Sila was true. Rowana started to make desperate excuses and said that Roel had given it to her. She said that her sister was just jealous of her, and because she wasn't loved at home, she was trying to set her up. The princess asked why anyone would give her half-blood sister the inheritance from her own mother. She said that besides, Rowana had just said that she didn't get along with Sila. At that moment, the princess asked Rowana in a stern tone for the last time if she had anything to say for herself. Rowana in a trembling voice asked for her forgiveness and said she was declining. Then she started to run away, but the princess ordered her to be captured. The knights grabbed the girl and she begged them to forgive her and let her go. But the princess said she shouldn't only apologize to her. She told Rowana to be kind and apologize to the main character as well. Rowana is angry and said she would never do that, asked why she would apologize to someone like... Well, at this point, the princess slapped the girl. She said that as the hostess of the evening, she had a duty to protect her bones, so asked her to change her for it. But she said she would not tolerate further insults to the main character from an uninvited guest. Princess, once again, that girl needs to apologize, not to her. Rowana held her cheek and trembled. Stammering, she apologized to the main character and said it was her fault. Roel said she never did that again. She was very uncomfortable with the whole situation. She wasn't a real Sila anyway, so she didn't seem to be offended. At that moment, the princess came up behind Rowana and took off her necklace. She said that the Countess would write about what had happened and asked her to escort Rowana home. But the maid told the princess there was no need for that. She said they had been informed that the Countess was coming here. The princess said that was fine, but asked me to prepare the letter anyway. At this point, the princess turned to the main character. Roel was very frightened by this and hid behind Euchaeus. The princess was surprised and asked if she was so scary. But Roel said she wasn't. She didn't understand why she was always shaking next to the princess. The princess said that's when Roel came out to her. Reluctantly, but more importantly, she didn't say yes. That's when Euchaeus came to Ingria's defense. He said that since everything had been resolved, he could give the girl a rest. He asked if the princess could not see how much she was afraid. The princess was a little angry and sighed. She asked what she had done to her in the first place, but she said it didn't matter anymore. She then handed the servants the necklace and said that as the hostess of the evening, she apologized to them for the inconvenience. She looked at the main character and said that it looked like she wouldn't be able to relax until she left. She said that then they should please try to have a good time. After that, the princess turned around and left. Afterwards, Euchaeus asked the main character if she was okay. Reluctantly, Roel said it was okay. She thanked the boy for what he had done. She realized that he had stirred by the princess noticing her discomfort. Afterwards, the girl patted them and said that the atmosphere was tense, but they were able to show their relationship clearly to everyone. Roel asked, meaning they had accomplished their mission. The girl said, of course. She said they also managed to compromise the Countess. The girl said she would ask them to enjoy the rest of the evening without incident. Roel thought she had a familiar aura. Roel didn't realize what kind of incident there could be. It was chaos. But then Roel realized how long it had been since she'd been to a reception. They were banned until the prince was rescued, and there were no goodies. Roel really wanted a sweet and told the food to wait for her. At this point, the protagonist wanted to turn to Euchaeus, but noticed that something strange was happening to him. She asked if the deputies had forbidden him to eat. Euchaeus was surprised and asked how she knew. But Roel said she was banned too. Sophia told her not to, and before her the deputy was outraged that time. Roel told the boy to eat because no one would know. Euchaeus got confused and said that's what the deputy told him, not to listen to her when she said that. Roel was angry. She didn't realize that the deputy could see the future. She thought that if Crown was a demon, he was a long way from an Orzen. Euchaeus Roel that she's right. He said there's no one here so we can eat. But Roel said she changed her mind. She said he was overreacting so she wouldn't eat even if he said she could. She thought she could control herself. Euchaeus said that then so no one would know for sure. Roel didn't understand what it meant to make sure no one found out. She wondered if she was going to get rid of all the guests somehow. She asked what he was up to. Well, at this point, Euchaeus started pulling the skewers out of the fruit. After one deft move, he used them to put out the lights. The princess was frightened and asked what had happened. All the people started packing and thought it was the wind. They wondered, but did someone open the windows on the first floor? Meanwhile, the main character along with her boyfriend stole some food. Roel suggested that Euchaeus go to the balcony. She realized she had to lock the doors too, so whoever was there couldn't see them. Afterwards, they snuck onto the balcony and the main character sat down on the railing. Euchaeus fed her, and the main character said that the food in the palace was very good. At that moment, the couple saw that the lights were already on in the room. At that moment, Roel asked the guy when they could meet the Supreme. Euchaeus said that it would be in a week, but he said if they could get engaged by then, they'd have to wait another month. Roel was scared because she thought they weren't going to make it. She said they'd already shown up to the community together, so all that was left was to get permission. By law, nobles under the age of 22 could not train or marry without the permission of their parents or guardians. Roel didn't realize that she would have to torture the count after all. And she said all you have to do is get a permit and everything else is no big deal. The main character asked the Euchaeus deputy something about it. Euchaeus said that the deputy said that he suspected something wrong with the girl's desire to meet the Supreme. Euchaeus said that of course, this meeting can be arranged, but the main heroine is so willing to do it that he is even willing to train with him, so it is a little strange. Now the main character didn't understand what he said, but she realized she couldn't say anything anyway. She realized that even if she was bound to the Dark Lord, and even if her holy power was still with her, it wouldn't be enough for them to believe her completely. At that point, Roel asked the guy if he should have told her. She said that the deputy would probably want to keep such details secret, but Euchaeus got embarrassed and said that he wanted to tell this girl. The main character was amazed. She realized that the guy trusted her that much. Euchaeus said that the deputy had not forbidden him to tell it, but Roel said that usually such things are tried to be kept secret, even if no one is directly forbidden to say them. Euchaeus looked sad and asked if it was true. Roel decided that when she saw her former assistant, she would declare that she was not the most naive knight in the world. She thought that she was still very old. At this point, hugged the guy. She asked if he told Vita all this for her sake. Euchaeus was silent for a second, but replied that he was. Roel started to smile even more and hugged the guy harder. Roel said she didn't want to wait a month because things would get complicated. She said she thought she needed to talk to the deputy. After a while, the deputy asked Euchaeus why he had put out the candles at the reception. He said he had asked him to behave himself. He asked how he could do something like that. He asked if he really thought no one would know about it. Well, that's when she stepped in for the guy and said their captain had done nothing wrong. She said she could have done it too. At this point, the deputy interjected their captain. Roel realized that their truth sounded a bit strange, since she wasn't a member of the squad. She asked, or her captain. At that moment, the deputy looked very strange, but the girl in Roel asked why he was looking at her like that. At this point, Euchaeus asked so she is his lady Aario. Roel replied in a cheerful tone that it was exactly like that. But at that moment, the deputy shouted that it wasn't like that. He asked what they were both doing. He asked the protagonist not to teach the guy any nonsense. Roel asked what that had to do with it. She said it's not nothing because they're engaged. At this point, and Roel hugged Euchaeus and said that it was all the more so because they needed to be as convincing as possible in this production. The deputy said he wanted to say not to take it too seriously. He said he never thought a lady of that background could behave like that. Roel laughed at the answer, realizing that she wasn't really a lady at all. At this point, an unknown girl entered the room, and I told the deputy that she had brought his order. At that moment, she turned to the protagonist and said that she must be of the Aario family. She said she was very happy to see them. This girl is the cook of the squad, and her name is Sana. Sana told the couple that since they had hardly had a proper meal at the reception, she had prepared some simple snacks for them. Roel realized that they had really been eating only desserts there, so she was getting a little hungry. She tasted the pieces and was happy because it was very tasty to her. Sana said smiling and told Inga to take a refill. Roel was so happy because at the Aario manor she hardly manages to eat. Her food there was very sparse and she hadn't eaten so well in a long time. At this point, the deputy turned to the protagonist and said that since she had finished eating, then they could talk in private. Roel was about to agree, but at that moment, Euchaeus covered her with his arm and asked her to stop. He told the deputy that she hadn't done anything wrong today and asked her not to tell her off. But the deputy said he wasn't going to. He said that even if he had wanted to, it would hardly have hurt her. Roel got angry after the steamy words. She thought she was very delicate and vulnerable in a way. The main character took Euchaeus by the hand and said there was nothing to worry about. She said that if anything, she would just run away, and told him not to worry about her and to go to bed. She said that the boy hadn't been able to sleep well lately. But Euchaeus shook his head and said something waiting for her. The deputy was shocked and said that Roel would break the captain's fingers like that. But at that moment, Roel and Euchaeus synchronously replied that they would not. The deputy was angry and asked if they were going to hold hands much longer. He told Roel to follow him. After Euchaeus left, the deputies told Roel to sit down. The main character said she hoped the conversation wouldn't take too long. The deputy said he'd come straight to the point, asked what he thought of the captain. Roel was surprised at the question, but said it was very strong. She thought the deputy was very strange, for she thought he would ask her about the count or why she was so keen on the highness. The deputy told the girl to tell more, and Ygritte said he was a good, kind, and very understanding. She said she liked him. The deputy was angry and upset. He said he'd put it more bluntly then. He asked her if she liked Euchaeus as a man. He asked if she would like to be exposed to him for real. Roel was taken aback by the questions and asked in what sense he was speaking. She asked if she could marry him for real, and said the girl was right. Roel was dumbfounded and couldn't answer. She didn't understand what was going on or what the boy was up to. Roel said, surprised, that you can't discuss something like this without the captain. She said that there had to be wallpaper consent. But the deputy said it doesn't matter if he's here or not because he's sure to be okay with it. Roel said she knew that, but she realized what she was doing directly affected him. She would never have thought the deputy was so unscrupulous, but she looked at him and realized that he'd actually always been like this. The deputy said that Euchaeus had been through a lot as a child, so he wasn't very fussy. He said that 3 meals a day, no life-threatening situations, and a roof over his head is all he needs to be happy. And Ingwe was confused because she didn't understand what he was talking about. The deputy said the captain was actually being overly naive. He said that he put him in charge of the troop because he is very easy to control. The king knows very well that Euchaeus will obey any order without question. So if their marriage is dissolved, Euchaeus will probably just remarry on His Majesty's orders. The deputy said that the captain would live his whole life in captivity, and as others would want him to. He said that with his strong past and character, he would not be able to marry an ordinary woman for love. So his marriage promises to be purely formal. Roel thought about it and realized that the deputy was right. She thought that Euchaeus had probably never even looked at a woman. Roel said they couldn't say he'd never meet one that he'd be attracted to. She said God works in mysterious ways. The deputy agreed with the girl and said that of course such a thing was possible. Roel said that the captain needed to meet a woman like that. The deputy said that's why he asked Ygritte about him. At that moment, Roel realized what the boy was talking about. She said that she certainly couldn't be a good wife. She didn't know what to do. She didn't even know how to behave as an unmarried noblewoman, and she was already married. The deputy said that Roel should just be true to him. He said she told him she liked him, didn't she? He said that most importantly, she was in a pretty precarious position, so if anything went wrong, he could easily get rid of her. Roel asked a little stockily as he asked if he was overreacting. But the deputy said with a smile that the girl would not be frightened by such threats. The deputy said that the girl had said she wanted to join the Paladins, but he said the church was a boring place and asked her to believe him. He said that besides, she couldn't live at the Earl's manor forever. He said that if the plot of their family was revealed to the people, it would be difficult for her to find a husband, and he thought that such an arrangement would be best for her. At this point, Roel hesitated and said that she had never really thought about what would happen after they were married. Roel asked if they got married, would she have to live with the captain? She said it wouldn't be so bad. She asked if she could live with the special forces. At that moment, the deputy cried and said that he suddenly felt very guilty in front of the squad. Roel asked where the big, scary demon had gone, but at that moment the deputy said he would ask one last question for the girl. He asked if the captain wanted to really marry her. Would she agree? Roel said yes without a second thought. It was not a problem for her at all, for she realized that she was under no obligation to return to the church. The deputy said that's marvelous. He said that then from this moment on he proposes to start treating their engagement as a real engagement. He said that the captain wasn't that young, so His Majesty could still find him a bride at any time, and now the matter was settled. But Roel asked to stop and said she wanted to ask something too. She asked if they would let her meet the Supreme. She said there's only a week left. She said they had to be officially trained before then. The deputy asked if it was Yuchez who told her that. At that moment, Roel remembered that the deputy had forbidden the boy to tell her about it. But the deputy said it's just that the captain doesn't usually remember things like that, and usually has to remind him of everything in a day or two. But the deputy said that the captain was very interested in what concerned the protagonist, and even asked him about her. He said that he was personally gathering information that might be useful. Roel was amazed at how much the captain was trying for her. The deputy asked if he was telling anything else, but Roel denied everything and said he only told her about the deadline. But the deputy said he would still find out no matter how hard she tried to hide and told her to confess. Roel said Yukazi told her that the deputy suspected something amiss in her eagerness to meet with the Supreme sooner rather than later. The deputy said he'd be sincere. He said he didn't understand why she would go to such lengths just to meet the Supreme, but he said he wouldn't get in her way. He said he was going to go with her anyway, so the main character couldn't hurt her even if she wanted to. But she said that even if she did, a week of formal training wouldn't be enough time. She was upset and asked why. She said she didn't want to wait a month. She said she'd rather go into the church then. At that moment, the deputy offered the girl an option. He said that he would help her meet with the Supreme in a week, but then she would give up the idea of joining the ranks of paladins forever. Roel agreed but told them to just let her meet the Supreme. The deputy agreed and said he would try to arrange it. He said that even if he couldn't get permission from Count Inferio, he had a couple of other ways to achieve their goals. Roel thought that was great, and they understood each other. But as Roel and his deputy were walking down the corridor, they heard a thump. The unknown man was asking someone to ignore him. After the inn with the deputy entered the room and the protagonist asked what the noise was. Unidentified guy yelled at Yuchez. He asked the deputy if he was the one who killed him and ignored him. He asked what right he had to treat him like that. But Yuchez ignored the guy and walked past him. He walked up to Roel and the girl asked him if he had waited long at her place, but the guy said he hadn't. The unidentified man said for Yuchez to answer him now. But the deputy said that probably, wine and all, he did not speak human language. The unidentified guy got angry and interjected. The deputy said that if the guy didn't understand human language, he probably couldn't speak it either. He asked if he even understood it now. The unidentified guy asked the deputy how dare he, but the deputy said the guy only had to answer whether he understood or not. He asked if it was easy, and suggested he try again. But the unidentified guy said he didn't have to talk to him at all. The deputy patted him and said he could even self-reflect. He said he had grown a lot and said it was wonderful. An unidentified guy approached the deputy asking if he wanted to die, but the deputy laughed and said his life belonged to His Majesty, so he couldn't give it to some vice captain. She realized that this guy was the vice captain of a special forces unit, but she didn't realize that strength wasn't valued in their ranks. I mean, the guy seemed even weaker than Crown. The deputies told the vice captain that he believed they were done with greetings. He asked what the hell had brought him here. He said it had been 2 months since their last meeting, and he was beginning to think the guy had resigned. Roel didn't realize if that was what greetings were. Now she didn't feel like greeting the deputy. But the vice captain snorted, and said he'd heard rumors that this weirdo had got a lady friend and he wanted to have a look. He said she was kind of skinny, but quite beautiful. Roel was angry because she thought the guy had just looked at her lustfully. He pissed her off and she wanted to beat the hell out of him. By law, paladins and Imperial Knight are forbidden to fight each other, but she wasn't a paladin anymore. Roel thought that since that was the case. After that, she got over the guy when he tried to touch her. At that point, Yuchez told the guy that if he touched her, he'd die. The main character was trembling with fear. She even had goosebumps on her back from the murderous aura emanating from Yuchez. She knew he could be dangerous. At this point, the vice captain said they'd have another look and ran off. Roel breathed a sigh of relief and said that if he had laid a finger on her, she would have destroyed him. But the Yukesh beat her to it. Yuchez timidly asked Inga if she was okay. The main character smiled and said, of course. She said she was a little disappointed, but not angry. At that moment, Roel asked if this guy was really the vice captain of the squad. She said she couldn't tell because he was so weak. But at this point, the deputy asked for permission to explain the situation. He said that the Special Forces squad is a bit different from other fathers' squads. He said that apart from the captain and vice captain, the life of every member of the squad belongs to His Majesty. Thus, they are perfect pawns of His Majesty. That's why so many noble families despise their very existence. If a squad is ordered to retrieve their heads, no one will dare stop them. That is why someone from the nobility is promoted to replace each captain. Just like the current form of Captain Ruth. Igor understood that, in other words, the vice captain is a spy and from those noble families who are afraid of the emperor. But she said that in his position he should be swamped with work, so it looked like he wasn't doing anything at all. She asked the deputy, who said he hadn't been here for 2 months. But the deputy said that just for him to come here is humiliating and disgraceful. Roel laughed at the lad, saying he was very flippant, but the deputy said they were in favor of his behavior anyway. At that moment, Roel thanked the captain for everything. She said he was tired enough as it was, but he'd helped her deal with the guy anyway. She said she thought it wasn't quite sorted out and suggested they go to bed. The main character didn't want to go home, and especially not at her fiancé's house, and she thought she'd just send someone to warn her about it. She asked Yuchez if he was tired, but Yuchez said that Crown said it was bad to do that. But Roel asked what difference it made what he said. She said there was only one obstacle they could have right now. At this point, they looked at the deputy. The deputy told them to do whatever they wanted to do. He didn't care. He said they would eat. Roel thought she might even be able to walk around here at night. She asked the captain if he had heard that. She realized that it was much easier with an Orzen than a deputy. The deputy said he would order hot water to be brought so they could wash and go to bed early. He said he would also send word to the Inferio house. But he said, however, no co-bathing for now. Roel agreed and said she already knew that. When the protagonist got out of the bath, she wondered where all the servants were. She assumed she had washed too quickly. She also didn't know where Yuchez's room was. Roel realized that the deputy couldn't help but take care of it, and someone would have to come and get her. But she thought that just waiting around would be boring and she could do what she wanted. That's when she realized she hadn't exercised in a while. Afterwards, she started doing all sorts of tricks. Roel realized that her body was much lighter now, so if she put in as much effort as she had before, she could be much faster. But because of the loss was their muscles, and she was weaker physically. In other words, there's no comparison to the past. Her general physical condition is in severe decline. Roel said it was a total disaster, but she thought at least she was alive. She thought she would consider it a premature retirement. She thought that once she had taken all the money from the Count, she would live happily ever after. At that moment, I thought maybe there were some sweets left in the kitchen. After a while, she came into the kitchen and said there she was. Roel thought she'd just take a bite and no one would even notice. She was so nervous she wanted something sweet, but in the first locker she found the ingredients. The second one has seasonings. Roel thought she didn't need much. Even decorative chocolate powder would do for her. At that moment, something flew out of the locker and Roel thought it was a rat. After a while, Sana came into the kitchen and asked if that thing was coming in here again. At that moment, she was surprised to see the main character. The deputy came in behind the girl and asked what was wrong. He asked Roel what had happened to her. And the protagonist also spent time sitting on the floor next to the scattered dishes. Deputy, ask Roel what she's doing here. The protagonist asked what's wrong. She said she was sick to do what she wanted. The deputy tried to object and said he didn't mean it that way. But he said the girl had forgotten and she was right. The deputy asked if the captain wasn't supposed to wait for her by the bathroom. He said he had asked him to escort her as soon as possible. But Ira told me that no one was there. The deputy asked where he had gone then. At that point, he asked if he had gone at all. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, people were running to Yucheze, who had passed out. The next morning, the main character woke up and in a good mood. At this point, she looked at the captain. Yesterday, he was so exhausted he had to be dragged out of the bath. He hasn't even moved once since last night. At this point, Roel touched the guy's hair and asked if he was asleep. Yuchez barely opened his eyes and looked the girl over. Roel asked if he slept well, but Yuchez only mumbled something. Roel asked with a smile, wondering if he was still awake. The captain mumbled something once more. Roel asked if she could touch him, but Yuchez had already closed his eyes and again gave no coherent answer. The main character realized that now the guy would agree to anything, and thought that maybe she should ask him for Kalidos. But she realized that even if he gave it to her, the deputy would take it back. At this point, Yuchez pulled the protagonist's arm and asked if she wasn't afraid of him. The protagonist answered without hesitation that not a bit. She said even if a guy was coming at her with a ball, she wouldn't be scared. She said being Audra's deputy was much scarier, and Yuchez agreed. Yuchez closed his eyes and said he was very glad she wasn't afraid of him. For a while, the deputy said he was thinking of preparing a room for Roel's temporary residence in the squad building. He said that so she could stay here until the engagement ceremony. He said that, in other words, he was asking her to move out of the Inferio house. Roel asked if she wasn't supposed to be spying there. She asked if the plans had changed. The deputy said that yes, they had changed. At this point, he said that if the main character was full, she could just leave the food on her plate without feeding the leftovers to the captain. He also told the guy to stop eating everything she gives him. The deputy said that last night the Marquis of Lane's daughter caught the two of them on the balcony. He said that even if they had spread the rumor that Captain Uchez was engaged to the protagonist for love, the House of Iferio did not believe it. The deputy said that because of their witnesses blabbering, their lies had become a little more believable. He said that because you put them in a better position to play the game, the situation had only become more dangerous. He said that so far they had not decided to do anything risky, but that could change soon. The deputy said that it is probably now extremely frightening that Captain Uchez may take over the entire Iferio clan. The deputy said that they could probably decide to kill the protagonist. But at that moment, an egret, as if nothing had happened, told the captain to take a spoon. The deputy told them to stop messing around and listen to what he was saying, but said they were listening anyway. The deputy said that Roel's family will be even more worried when she settles here. He said they would definitely try to get rid of her this time. Nori got a smirk on her face and said it was nothing then. She said they wouldn't have enough guards at the house to take her down. Uchez added that they're pretty weak, but the deputy said there must be some very powerful people behind them. He said that this time they might start to act. He said that since the crown prince was involved, it was unlikely that it was all the work of just the local count. Roel had thought before that the countess must surely be involved in all this too, but Roel realized that the deputy was right and that the real enemy might be a bigger man. The protagonist realized that maybe even bigger than she originally thought.